Commissioner Chris Graham, who's going to give us some updates on many of the credits that we have passed through this committee, or this committee has worked on the last couple of years. So we're excited to hear that and a little bit about pink taxes. So thank you, Commissioner, for coming today. Yeah, that'll be great. Let's make sure that mic is on too for you. That way we can make sure people hear. Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for having me this morning. I have a fairly large handout, but I wanted to kind of move through it fairly quickly and then, of course, take any questions that you all might have. A couple of things that I wanted to give you all an update on is our adoption credit, which y'all, I think, initially put in place in 2006 and have changed it a little bit over the years. That's a credit up to $10,000 for children residing in Mississippi and adopted in Mississippi. $5,000 for children residing outside of Mississippi and residing and adopted in Mississippi. Over the years, that credit has been between $300,000 and $400,000 a year that's claimed on income tax returns, and we're trending this year to be about $350 right now. It's still a little early, so I think that'll go up a little bit between now and the end of the year. You know, the extended due date filing return for filing was October 15th, and so the numbers are pretty complete, but I think it'll go up a little bit. And so that's a credit that's allowed for folks who incur adoption expenses. I think it's a very helpful credit. The other one that you all have put into place is the dependent care credit for individuals. That's tied somewhat to the federal dependent care credit. The credit is 25% of the amount claimed for the federal dependent care credit. That's a new one that you all have just recently put into place. So the information is kind of hot off the press as far as what that's done this year. I think we've received about 8,500 returns and claimed about a 1.3 million for those credits. And so that's what's been utilized to date. I think that'll go up a little bit too as we continue to complete returns for the 2023 tax year. The other one is the employer provided dependent care credit. That's one that y'all have had in place for a while, but you've tweaked it as well. That's a credit that's allowed for employers to provide dependent care, or now they can provide a stipend for dependent care. I think y'all, I didn't make a note of when y'all tweaked that. Was it 2023? Y'all tweaked that? So y'all tweaked that in 23. That one's brand new, and we really have not had anybody claim that credit recently. And one of the difficulties we have on credits like this is if a taxpayer, one or two taxpayers claim it, because of the confidentiality rules, we have to be careful disclosing how much has been claimed or who has claimed it. And so if we receive some, in the past, though, we've had very few employers, before you tweaked it, utilize that credit, but it has been utilized in the past, just not very many taxpayers. Okay.
I'm going to jump right in because you're the man to ask about this. So this one, the business takes that, correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir. They can provide the way it works now, they can either provide dependent daycare for their employees, or they can provide up to $6,000 as a stipend that they can take as a credit.
Okay. On the federal level, there is I guess it's a tax credit for childcare expenses. We don't have that in Mississippi, do we? So to put another way, if I'm a parent and I pay childcare expenses, I can deduct that.
So I think that's the one right above that, the dependent care credit for individuals, and it is tied somewhat to the federal credit that's allowed. I think that one's 25% of what's allowed on the federal as the federal credit. I believe the hell is that.
So how much can a parent take with that one? You know,
I have to look at and see. I don't know if there's a limit off the top of my head. There are some. You have to have income, number one, and there are some requirements you have to meet on the federal level. I'll have to take a look at that and get it to you. But it's 25% of whatever's allowed on the federal.
Why did we only do 25%?
I never question the wisdom of the legislature, Senator Wiggins.
I mean, okay.
If my understanding, if I remember correctly, one of the reasons we did 25% is it was really an unsure tax credit that we knew we really were very we didn't have some hardcore numbers as to what that might look like or what that might be. I think this was kind of a way to conservatively look at this particular issue and see what we were
Well-
doing in regards to that.
Well, I can give some hardcore numbers. It costs about $10,000 a year to send a child to childcare. And on the federal level, if my memory serves me, you can take $5,000. Why is it that hard? Why, Madam Chair?
But I think there was we were having difficulty really pinning down what that would look like, what that would cost the state. And so this was a way to move into that arena in a conservative way, which I think, and really kind of get some better facts and figures on that.
Well, this is not my realm, but any tax credit, and we're about to go through a bunch more tax credits, any tax credit that you give takes money away from state government and you put pressure on other taxes. And so, every dollar you take away from the income tax, you may put more pressure on sales tax to make up the difference in budget shortfalls. And so there is a trade-off from a legislative perspective that you all have to consider every time you pass a tax credit or you pass a new fee. You really, if you're just talking about one, hey, it's only $5,000, but you all pass hundreds of these things in a couple of legislative sessions, and it does add up over the grand scheme of each one.
I'll leave that up to the finance committee. And you're, and you're right, you're right. Back on that one. So the dependent childcare received 8,508 returns for $1,357,157. Is that, so does that mean that 8,500 returns claimed that credit?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and the average is just kind of a rough number, but I was really going to take that off, but yeah, it's 8,500 returns, $1.3 million has been credited.
Okay, and how many, generally speaking, how many returns do we have?
We receive about 1.6 million returns, I believe, individual income tax returns in a year. I'll double check that number, but I think it's about 1.6. It varies 1.5 to 1.7.
And of the ones taken, they get $157?
Of the $8,500 returns that were filed that claimed this credit, it was $1.3 million.
Okay. If the whole purpose is to incentivize parents and to help parents, $157, while it's great, everything helps, that ain't a drop in the bucket when it comes to childcare expenses. So. Okay. Thank you.
Duly noted, Senator Wiggins. So having covered those three things, I wanted to run through a couple of our income tax credits that come after this. And we've just got a whole bunch of them. And I'll kind of go through them quickly and just kind of hit them each. So on the second page, we call them your Pregnancy Resource Charitable Organization credits. That's a credit that you all passed a couple of years ago. And that's a credit that goes for donations to organizations that provide pregnancy resource services or crisis pregnancy centers. Y'all have allocated up to $10 million that can be used for that credit per year. And if you look back over the next couple of pages, it shows you what we did in the 2022 calendar year. There was 2.5, almost 2.6 million that was allocated to pregnancy resource centers in calendar year 2022, which is tax year 2022. 2023 is the next page. It was $2.4 million that year. And to date, and again, these numbers are not quite complete because we're still in the filing season, it's $2.1 million that has been allocated to pregnancy resource charitable organizations. This is available to business taxpayers. This credit is. They can take it against their income tax liability, insurance premium tax, insurance premium retaliatory tax, and then they can also take it against their ad valorem taxes. So we have a process worked out with the locals. If somebody takes it as a property tax, the locals submit that information to the Department of Revenue, and then the Department of Revenue reimburses them for that credit. Next, I wanted to cover the qualified charitable organizations. This is a credit that's available to individual taxpayers. And this credit really provides for a credit when you make donations. So that says QCO credits at the top of the page. When you make donations to agencies that really, they provide services to low-income residents in the state. It's one of the, this one's a little bit different from some of the others. It's $1 million that's allowed for this credit, but this $1 million is also shared with the next page, which we call qualified foster care charitable organizations. And so $1 million between the QCOs and the QFCCOs. And the difference between the two is the QFCCOs, they provide foster care related services. And so the $1 million, again, this is an individual donation that can be made. There's some limits. I've got the limits listed there on the page on what you can take. Senator Wiggins, the wisdom of the legislature, y'all put some limits on how much you can take. And then the next couple of pages are a little different. I'd really have you go over to the last page. It has a spreadsheet that shows you the kind of the combined to date for QCOs and QFCCOs. There have been about $407,000 taken this year. And in years past, they've gotten fairly close to the million, but so far this year, we're at 407,000. And then the next page is eligible charitable organizations. These are similar to the QCOs, but these are the business credits that are allowed. So you have an individual credit that's allowed. It's $1 million for that credit. And then the business credit has a limit of $9 million. And so you have the ECO credits available to business taxpayers. Again, they can take it against their income tax, insurance premium tax, insurance premium retaliatory tax, ad valorem taxes. And this one has been fairly popular as well. So back in 2022, I think the limit was $8 million and we hit the $8 million limit. In 2023, y'all had increased it to $9 million a year and we hit $8.7 million. And in this year, we're at $7 million and there's still another little bit over 1.8 million to go. And we could hit that just, with returns get filed between now and the end of the year and people who apply for those credits as well.
Which credit is that?
That is the eligible charitable organization credit. ECO, it says ECO at the top. And so that really applies to organizations that provide services related to adoption or foster care related activities. The next credit I wanted to share with you all is the food bank credit. It's called FBCO credit. That's a fairly new credit that y'all have just put into place. I think it's been in place for almost 2 years now. And so that's a credit that's allowed for donations that are made to food banks that really service at least in up to 5 counties. And so these are the folks who deliver the meals to the food banks. A fairly limited group of people, I think, qualify for this credit, but y'all allocated $1 million. It's a business credit that's allowed for business taxpayers. And in 2023, the credit claimed was $184,000. And then so far this year, it's almost $377,000, $378,000. So it's grown a little bit. That's a really good credit that I think you all put into place, serves really good purpose. The next one, really the next two, I think, are eligible transition housing organization credits. And these are donations that are made to entities that help folks who are, certain age and homeless, or families who are homeless, unwed pregnant women who need temporary shelter. So any type of organization that provides some type of temporary housing help to people who have housing challenges would qualify. And so you have $1 million credit that relates to individuals. Excuse me. And then a couple of pages over, you have an ETHO credit for businesses that is a $10 million credit that's allowed. And as far as individual credit goes, in 2023, $394,000 was claimed. So far in 2024, $158,000. And then on the business side, the allocations have been a little higher. Of course, the total maximum is higher too. So on business side, in 2023, there was 3.3 million. And then so far this year is 2.3, almost 2.3 million. As far as tax credits go, I just wanted to give y'all kind of an overview of those, let you see what those were. Y'all have spent a lot of state resources supporting tax credits for agencies that do a lot of work. Most of these are self-marketed by the agencies who are receiving the donations. So we don't do, as a department, we don't do a lot of marketing. We put it in some of our instructions and materials, but the agencies really spend a lot of time marketing these programs to their constituents. So they're kind of self-marketed by the industry that benefits from the credits. And the only other thing I was going to try to discuss is very briefly are diapers. I know that y'all deal with a lot more than just diapers when you're talking about taxes related to families and children and women. So the last page just is a diagram. I don't know if y'all have had folks talk with you in the past about what states tax diapers and what states don't. We've run a real rough estimate and think if you were to exempt diaper and related products, just diaper and related products, it'd be about $8 million a year, $9 million a year. Rough estimates just based on data that we've seen. I don't know if you've had anybody else come forward and give you a number. As far as feminine hygiene products, that's going to be a little more difficult for us to come up with an estimate. We'll continue to kind of work on that one, but we don't have a good estimate for you on that right now.
Commissioner, when you said it was about, so you think there would be about 12 million less in, but if we just took the sales off of, if we just took the taxes off of diapers, you're looking at about a $12 million.
I may have said 12, I meant $8 million. So about I'd say 8 to 10 would be a rough estimate based on, there are a couple of groups that really advocate for diapers and non-taxability of diapers. And we've utilized some of their data to come up with that number, but I would say $8 to $10 million is what it would cost the state if you said diapers are not subject to sales tax. Now, from an administration standpoint, every time you all put some type of exemption in the law, you make it a little bit harder on businesses. And also, if you're not going to charge sales tax on diapers, then, the state tax revenue is still needed to run state and local government. And so you have locals who are affected by that, and the state is affected, to a lesser amount as far as when you're talking about only $10 million. But in tight budget years, $10 million can be the difference between being able to put a balanced budget together and having to cut some agencies.
And these are the red states that you've given us are all the states that do not tax.
Those are states that diapers are not taxed, yes.
Okay.
And then there are a couple of states that are dark black that don't have a sales tax. And then the rest of the states are kind of that gray color, and they're actually taxed at the standard rate, whatever the standard sales tax rate would be.
Do you have questions about that? No, good.
I'm sorry, I had my coffee this morning, so I'm going back to the dependent care credit and reading, if I'm reading it right, what you have here, the credits available for expenses while they're looking for work?
You can either be looking for work or working, either one. So it includes while you're actually actively searching for work.
If you
as
actually
well.
have a job,
You can claim it if you actually have a job, either one.
you can if you do have a job or you don't have a job, or you're just looking for work.
You're either working or you're looking for a job, you can claim the credit if they're qualified expenses.
Okay. And it says it has to qualify the federal AGI not more than $50,000. What is the AGI in average AGI in Mississippi?
I have a chart that really shows an AGI for taxpayers in the state of Mississippi. I don't have the numbers collected, but I would say a majority of taxpayers in Mississippi are either right at or below that number. I can get you that number. I just don't have them memorized as far as how many taxpayers, the number of taxpayers we have. I've got a chart on that, but I just don't have it with me.
Well, okay. So, Madam Chair, this goes to the commissioner's point about what we have to look at, which is supporting the trade-off that goes on. If we support women and children in this state, a credit like this is doing nothing. Why don't we do credits that actually do something? And what I mean, why are we limiting it to people why don't we open it up to everybody that has a child that has to pay childcare? Because it's expensive and it keeps people from working. I don't care if you make $100,000 or you make $22,000. $10,000 in childcare is expensive. And that's been the case across the country. So I hope the finance committee led by Chairman Bryan will take my comments here and play this when assuming I propose a bill, because I have done a bill on this. I didn't, and so maybe I'm pushing for that, but they can record this and play this. And do we support our families? Do we support children? And if we do, then we need to make it work. So that's what I'll say about that. And I can tell you whether you make 100,000 or you make 22,000, $5,000 or $10,000 in childcare expenses is a ton of money and would go a long way to improving people's bottom line and getting them to work. We did, and sorry, but we had a hearing in our case and delayed about the collaboratives, and Lay said they chose to stay and collect welfare benefits because it was so expensive for childcare. So we're either going to make it work or not. That's my coffee speaking this morning. So thank you.
Commissioner, I do think we probably want to get with you to try to get what the senator said and try to get some more numbers in regards to this so that we can make an informed decision for the body on a lot of this information. So
We'll certainly go back and see what we can put together on, particularly on that question.
well, on that question, and then looking at increasing, just
Mhm.
kind of looking and help give us some options, I think would be
Sure,
outstanding.
we can do that.
So, great. Thank you so much. Do you have any other questions? Okay, any other questions? Thank
Thank-
you, Commissioner. This is a great update and all of these tax credits. And Commissioner, one thing we need a little bit of help with is the credits that we offered to our employers. We are finding out that many of our employers did not know about this credit.
Yeah.
We've kind of partnered with MEC to hopefully get the word out on
And
that.
we feel like we can do a better job as an agency because unlike the other credits that I just went through, that one is not promoting. And so we think we could do a little bit better job of putting that information out to the business community as well. And so we've got that on our list of things to work on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. So,
Thank you.
good deal. Thanks. All right, our next speaker that we have here today is Stacy Riley and Heather Wagner. So we look forward to y'all going ahead and coming up. Stacy is the CEO of the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence. And Heather Wagner, has been involved in this arena in domestic violence. I won't say how many years because I will tell both of our ages right now with that. So we really appreciate y'all coming in today and giving us some information about domestic violence and sexual assault. Thank you.
Okay.
And some needs in our state.
Yeah, thank you for having us and good morning. I would, if I don't need to have much coffee, I would have brought you some more, but.
Well, thank you. It's good to see friendly faces and drive all the way up here.
Nice. I mean, it's a good reason to come to Jackson, right?
Right.
So like I said, I'm Stacy Riley. I'm with the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence. And what we are is an agency that's been around for almost 50 years. And what we do is we provide a variety of services to anyone who's been affected by domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, or homicide. So we serve we serve between 3,000 and 4,000 unique individuals a year in the services we provide. We offer 2 shelter programs that shelter domestic violence as well as human trafficking survivors. We provide advocacy. We're in 18 justice and municipal courts on the Gulf Coast to be able to have a voice in the courts for victims who show up for court. We have a civil legal clinic that does divorces and child custody for individuals because we know that is a cost that's hard to pay, and these are all domestic violence related cases. We have housing programs. We put victims of domestic violence and human trafficking and their children into places to live, and we pay their living expenses for up to 2 years. Because it's looking at ways that we can not only assist someone with removing themselves from a violent situation, but how can we support their move from that and surround them with services that can assist with them getting help and getting away from the violence and also healing from the violence they've endured. So we have master's level therapists. We have a therapeutic preschool program for kids who have been exposed to domestic violence or have been sexually assaulted. We are about to open the state's first Family Justice Center project, which is a one-stop shop for victims of interpersonal violence to come into and get services, not just from us, but from other partners. So we can, again, have a place that victims can come to at one place instead of victims having to go all over the place. And we're also getting ready to open a forensics medical clinic on the Gulf Coast that will be available to provide sexual assault examinations for adults and children, as well as examinations for domestic violence victims who have been strangled. So I say all this to let you know that what we do as a community, what we do as a movement is we look for ways that we can collectively address the needs of survivors, as well as how can we bring in the system to assist with providing a better place in Mississippi for victims to heal, to grow, to move from, wherever they are, and just a little bit of information on me. I was a victim of domestic violence 20 plus years ago, and now I'm the CEO of the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence. So there is ways to get through domestic violence, to heal from that, and have a life that you, at one point in time, you didn't know you were able to have. Heather we are partners in crime with doing this. Her mother was the director of the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence for 25 years. She put domestic violence, the movement on the map. And I had the pleasure of working under Jane years ago, because I've been in the movement for a long time as well. And so we have come together to look at ways that we can collectively to address some things, and meeting with our elected officials to determine what some things we can put in place. And we came up with a few items that the state can put in place that will be a significant movement for the state of Mississippi to make this state more responsive to victims of domestic violence. And this bill is specifically for domestic violence victims. So we, in speaking with Bryce a few weeks ago, when I was telling him all my wish list items, because I do this sometimes, and he said, "You know what this sounds like? It sounds like an omnibus bill." And he schooled me on what that was, because I had no idea what that was, because I'm new getting into this whole thing.
Don't give away my secrets.
It was a great idea. So what we decided to do is put together some key points that would strengthen the current laws we have in the state, and it would make it a safer place for all people to live in the state of Mississippi. And we reached out to, because I kept hearing Nicole Boyd's name with people I talked to about this initiative. It's like, all right, here we are. So I'm going to step aside, and I'll let Heather talk a little bit about the bill and what it will play, because she can speak the legality language better than I can. So yeah, anyway, but thank you for having us here.
Thank you, Stacy. And I do have to say, I'm really proud of the work that the Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence does in the communities. They serve the lower 6 counties of Mississippi. I'm especially proud of the way Stacy has carried on my mother's legacy and grown it and into this wonderful agency that it is today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Heather Wagner. I was with the Attorney General's office for a long time. I was the director of our domestic violence division within the Attorney General's office for a period of years, about 12 years. And then I moved over to the Department of Health to oversee the Office Against Interpersonal Violence. So a couple of different roles I have played in working with domestic violence. And I feel like I need to explain that so you understand the view that we come with different views. Stacy's from the service provider side of things and working with the individuals who are affected. I work more, and they have an agency, they work in the systems as well, but I've been on the training and the policy side of things a little bit more. With the Attorney General's office, we worked with, obviously, we were here at the legislature every year, asking for improvements to our state laws that relate to domestic violence. We worked with our protection order statutes. We worked with creating our human trafficking law. And we also did training for law enforcement officers, prosecutors, the judiciary, court clerks, basically anyone in the system that would come in contact with domestic violence. And then moving into the role at the Office Against Interpersonal Violence, we were on the funding side of things and began to see the challenges that these agencies faced in trying to affect real changes with the amounts of funding that they're getting. So I do have an idea of all of that, but what has developed is that our system, the way our system here is in Mississippi, we are very siloed. Law enforcement works over here and judges work over here, and this judge doesn't communicate with that judge, and the courts are very distanced. And that affects the statewide response to domestic violence because we need that communication. We need to understand the commonalities. We need to have common practices. We need to have uniform ways of addressing these cases throughout the state. So that is a lot of what our proposal will do, is kind of close those gaps, make sure that the people that are working with domestic violence cases know what the domestic violence laws are and what is required, and understand the situations that many of these individuals are coming from. So the first concept that we had was to create a statewide domestic violence fatality review board. Mississippi is one of 4 states in the nation that does not have one. They all look a little bit different. Most of them have been legislatively authorized just because of the questions around who is a member, who participates, how does that information flow between one agency and the other, how they operate. But the concept behind a fatality review team is to examine situations in which there were homicides or deaths. Some of these groups also look at suicides related to domestic violence. But to examine these cases from a holistic approach, looking backwards to see where were the different times that these individuals, that this family interacted with the various systems. And is there a way that we can improve communication between those systems so that when a person goes to the hospital, obviously there are HIPAA rules about communication, but when a person goes to law enforcement, that there's a documented record of not only that, but that there's a way to send those people and make sure that they have information on services that are available and better communication between that, to make sure that the hospitals understand they can refer individuals without violating any federal HIPAA regulations, refer individuals for assistance, to make sure that we're all touching base with the other systems that can surround this individual and make sure that they get the services or they have access to the services that they need. What we find in many of the homicides, and Stacy has better statistics on this than I, but we find that many of these cases, there were multiple opportunities for intervention in some of these situations that end up in a death. And this proposal is not about pointing fingers at where and who dropped the ball. It's trying to figure out how can we improve this in the future to make sure that doesn't happen again. So the thrust of the Fatality Review Board legislation would be to allow us to figure out a way to identify the deaths, both homicide and suicide, that are caused by or related to domestic violence. Right now, our homicide statutes don't require any kind of differentiation between a homicide of a stranger or a homicide of a loved one. Our law enforcement agencies don't keep track of homicides in that way. So it's very difficult even for us to ascertain how many domestic violence homicides there truly are within the state of Mississippi. We get it anecdotally, and we may be, because, we see in the newspaper, well, this was in a domestic relationship, but it's not reported as such in the offense report or the investigation. And that would be one of the things that we would seek to have this bill change, is to figure out some way that those cases are noted when, bless you, are noted as domestic violence. And then once those cases are identified, the bill would give a process for how we select which ones are going to be reviewed. Another important consideration in reviewing homicides is making sure that we're not reviewing cases that are still actively within the court system. So there's going to have to be some period of time, some threshold that these cases go beyond before we're able to actually look at them. But we don't want that to be too far in the future, because if we review a case that's 10 years old, systems may have completely changed by then, and what was occurring in that community at the time the homicide occurred might have changed. So there has to be some kind of medium developed there. So we would review those systems, and what we would do is we would pull together every one that we are able to identify. I say we, the board, would pull together every one that is identified as having interactions with this family, whether that's the schools, CPS, the hospital system, law enforcement, the courts, and have those groups provide to us the information on their interactions. And this board would then review to find out, well, there seems to be a lack, there was clear evidence that this child was having difficulties in school. What did, is there a way that we can help schools know how to recognize these signs and reach out? So furthermore, we would help, once we've reviewed those cases, the overall purpose would be then to recommend and submit findings to the legislature on potential changes to laws, potential policy review that might be necessary that might help prevent future homicides, but overall would better serve the citizens of the community by addressing the services that they need. So that's the overall goal of this Fatality Review Board. It's twofold. We can't really say that because the Fatality Review Board exists, we won't have domestic violence homicides anymore. But what we can do is we can say that the Fatality Review Board exists, and as a result, we're improving the systems and we're improving the responses. And we hope that that will lead to earlier intervention in these cases and then fewer homicides. The second prong of the bill, well, let me, I'm not quite done with that bill yet. I was going to jump ahead. The idea, and we have, last year a bill was introduced to create a Fatality Review Board. And it was housing the actual board within the Department of the Coroner's Office, Department of the Medical Examiner's Office. We would actually think we would benefit more from having it in either the Department of Health, where they currently have the Maternal and Child Health Review Board and the Infant Mortality Review Boards. They're familiar with this type of thing. It is along the same lines of preventive health, because domestic violence is a health crisis. It is a public health crisis. So placing it in the health department, and Dr. Edney has been approached, and I don't want to put any words in any mouths, but he, that is something that they have been made aware of. So we would ask that this bill be drafted to not only create the board, to place it within an existing state agency and give it the powers that it needs, the mechanisms, so that we can share that information. Another barrier that we frequently run into is the sharing of information. Every agency is very reluctant to share information about a case that they have investigated. And some of those are legitimate statutory barriers where they cannot share that information. Some of those are confidentiality requirements. But with legislation specifically allowing that sharing, that would not only relieve them of their liability for disclosing that information, it would also allow us to get that information to be able to use it as part of this review. And any such information would be kept solely for purposes of this review and kept confidential by the board. So it wouldn't be that we would get it and then we would say, hey, so-and-so police department did this. It would be all kept within the board, except for purposes of making generalized reports as to recommended actions to be taken. I believe that may be it. Oh, we also believe that this, the difficulty lies in, again, the nasty F word, which is funding, right? Trying to figure out how to make a successful board. We don't want to set up a board that doesn't have the capacity to do what we are hoping this board will do. For a board like this to be successful, there needs to be somebody overseeing it, somebody administering it, somebody making sure to call the meetings, to organize the meetings, to gather the information, to prepare the report, that sort of thing. So there may be a price tag associated with this to either fund a position that is part-time dedicated to doing these functions. We don't know necessarily whether or not it would be a full-time job. I will tell you, several of the states that we've spoken to, they do have a full-time coordinator of this program to get it up, and particularly to get it up and running, to get the policies in place, to get the practices. So that is something that we're still trying to get a handle on, but we do believe that having it dedicated, rather than putting it on an agency as an unfunded mandate, hey, in addition to your job, now this person who does 14 other things is now going to have to also manage the Fatality Review Board. We think that's setting it up for failure because it won't be a priority for that individual. So that is something that we feel pretty strongly about, that if we're going to develop this thing, we need to develop it and make it able to do its function properly. The second thing that I mentioned, the making sure that we're able to address domestic violence homicides and making sure we recognize them as such, that might require an amendment to how we define homicide, or an amendment to our current domestic violence crime statute to reference that domestic violence homicides shall be documented as such. I don't know, I see Senator Wiggins kind of thinking on how that might work, but there has to be a way to make sure that they're documented, maybe not carry any separate penalties, but just documented differently in the recordings. Something else that goes along with that is, as I've seen in my experience in years training, there continues to be a training gap in our court systems with regard to how to handle domestic violence cases. We have personal experiences of individuals approaching courts to obtain a domestic abuse protection order, and the court clerks turning them away, saying, we don't do those here, you'll have to go to another court. I believe that is an an education issue. And while that problem exists in many other facets of the system that don't really understand domestic violence, it's vitally important that our court systems are there and accessible for our victims who come in and are brave enough to take that step to go and try and obtain a domestic abuse protection order.
Heather, on that, are things like that, when y'all find out about those situations, are those reportable to judicial review, like the Judicial Performance Committee, their office? How do we stop practices where we say, oh, we don't do that, when the law requires that you do that?
Yeah.
Where do we go with that?
You know, ultimately what happens in the court is the responsibility of the judge. So I believe there have been conversations with courts about not being, that not being the appropriate purpose. The difficulty is with, as with anything, when reporting something to judicial performance or another reporting agency, is you continue to have to work with these courts and individuals. So to me, the way around it, rather than reporting it, the way around it would be a better practice to make sure that they're educated. And resolve that issue. That this is not something that has been kept secret. We have talked to court clerks, judges for years about not being able to turn individuals away just because you don't feel like doing that today. And that may be an overgeneralization. I don't know that these courts do it for that reason. They may do it just because they're not familiar with the process. But making sure that kind of honing in on the statutes that already require both orientation training for judges and clerks and other court personnel, as well as ongoing annual training, and making sure that at least a minimum number of those hours address the issue of domestic abuse protection orders. what courts handle those, the processes, that sort of thing. We think that would go a long way towards, because many times there's turnover in those offices, and everybody else in the office may know that this is something, but then there's a new clerk there and somebody approaches that new clerk who hasn't gotten that training yet related to those. So we feel that would be a better way to kind of approach that issue. Because there's really not a stick that we have that we can utilize to make sure that all the courts are addressing these situations appropriately. And finally, piggybacking on that, there are a number of states who have chosen by legislation to create domestic violence courts, which are courts that are, this is the only type of matter that they handle. Some of them handle it differently. Some of them have a cooperation between the criminal and the civil. Some of them have created courts which handle both the criminal and the civil, and it's kind of a vertical kind of situation. They handle the domestic abuse protection orders, they handle the misdemeanors, and then if it extends to a felony, they also handle those felony cases. So we've been exploring, I believe there were some early efforts to do this in the 90s or early 2000s. I think Washington County had a domestic violence court. It was run through the Chancery Court, and it was a little bit odd, but the chancellor would kind of get reports from the other courts on what was going on in the cases. That kind of fizzled out because that one particular chancellor was a great champion of this, and she was no longer on the bench, I think it just kind of fell away. But what we're suggesting is that the legislature authorize the creation of a pilot project on the Mississippi Gulf Coast that would, in essence, create a domestic violence court within the county court. All 3 counties on the Gulf Coast, lower Gulf Coast, have county courts. Hancock is only youth court, however, but Harrison and Jackson have practicing youth courts that not only do practicing county courts that not only do the youth court matters, but also do the regular jurisdiction of county courts. This court makes a lot of sense because not only is it a court that can hear ex parte, temporary, and final domestic abuse protection orders, but they can also have jurisdiction over, be given jurisdiction over the misdemeanors and whatever jurisdiction the circuit court assigns them in felony matters. So they are the only court that is truly capable of handling all of these matters that come before courts regularly in domestic violence situations. These judges would be specially trained. They would have specialized knowledge. Their clerks would have that specialized knowledge of the different formats, the different forms, the different remedies available, the services available. They would have those connections to the community. And the benefit of having one court that all these cases are funneled through would solve the problem of this lack of communication. We may have an individual that's convicted in Biloxi Municipal Court, just to use Harrison County as an example. And the only reason we know that this person might also have been convicted in Long Beach is because we have advocates who are there in those courts watching. It's not because it's reported to any centralized system. So without individuals there bringing that to the attention of the court may, or the prosecutor may charge that as not as a third offense or a fourth offense, but may charge it as a first offense and allow that person to have that, go into diversion and get that expunged. So we're missing a lot of pieces. Having a centralized uniform court would close those gaps, would make sure that not only the victims know where they need to go to get help, but it would also help hold the offenders accountable and be able to make sure those offenders are referred to services that they might need. So the idea is to pilot this project and let us come back and show the successes so that hopefully we can then move forward and try and get something established on a statewide level. But we feel that we need, we do need the data. We're unable to gather data these days because the systems are so diverse and so bifurcated. Stacy, I think you pulled some numbers of the numbers of cases that your agency is involved in each year. It's well into the thousands. There would be plenty of cases for this court. That was a question we got. Well, there wouldn't be enough cases for one court to handle it. Oh, yes. There are plenty of cases, unfortunately. In some of the smaller counties, perhaps not. But in some of the bigger counties, definitely, there are sufficient numbers of domestic violence cases, unfortunately, to support a separate court dedicated to that. And it would actually, conserve resources in some sense, because rather than having all these cases going to two different individuals, having multiple people dealing with them, you'd have one centralized. And it could conserve resources. Something else we've tried to explain to law enforcement officers by dedicating one officer to domestic violence response. This is a little bit off track, but dedicating one officer to domestic violence response, the agencies always say that, well, that's not feasible because we have so many other cases. We can't dedicate one person. But if you dedicated one person, all the rest of these officers could do the other business. And this one officer could handle the domestic violence. So that's kind of the theory behind this court. It would allow to free up the courts and the prosecutors in those courts for the other crimes that come before them, the traffic violations and the DUIs and the other very important criminal offenses, and allow specific focus by this one court on these domestic violence crimes that impact not only those two individuals involved, but their whole families, their children, who then grow up to be more likely than others to be involved in domestic violence. And hopefully we can address that systemically in these ways. I think those are the major thrusts of the legislation. I know Stacy has some anecdotal information that she can share to you about the importance of trying to address these issues, but I'll be happy to address any questions any of you have.
I have a couple questions, and I appreciate hearing that. On the proposed pilot, have y'all talked to the 3 county supervisors yet? To the county court judges?
We're making our rounds around that. So we've got collecting statistics, the judges. After we get the support and the buy-in,
Come speak. They're recording it, or people are probably listening. So
okay. So what we've been doing, we've been on a information gathering tour for this whole thing. And so we have spoken with county court judges in Harrison and Jackson counties, talked about the need for this, talked about their interest in performing this role. We have the interest there with it. We've talked to some of our municipal court folks as far as there, and just to be real with you, like municipal and justice court do not like domestic violence cases because they're complicated, and there's a lot that goes into those, and so it warrants.
I would actually concur and think county court would be a good place.
Right. As far as a caseload of county courts, it's not extensive like a chancery court or something like that. And it would fit in that. That way you can have the specialized, you can have a prosecutor in there because counties have prosecutors already. And you have the judge, and you have one point of entry for all cases that are all misdemeanor domestic violence cases that come through counties. And to hear those cases from one perspective. And also it helps to pool resources too, because we have advocates in 18 courts and we're getting ready to have them in 2 extra courts. It'll be 20 courts. If we could call those down and we can put our resources as the advocates in the court to, one advocate in each court, each county, that significantly increases what we're able to do for the courts in the other side of the service delivery, and also, assisting with bringing more victims to court, because we know that victims a lot of times don't want to come to court because there's a lot of things that can happen from the time the abusive incident occurs to when the court happens, maybe 2 months later, and court's scary. So, and again, and we've talked to victims across our service area and other areas that we go to, and the compelling story is victims are afraid of coming to court. for a lot of reasons. And so now if we have the pool, the resources we have, we'll be able to make those contacts with victims right after it occurs. We're doing that as a pilot project for a federal grant right now, but we'll be able to spread that out and make those phone calls the day after the incident occurs. And that way, hopefully the abuser is still in jail, and we offer them services that, sooner rather than later, and carry them in, and they know that there's going to be a friendly face in that courtroom when they show up, and we can even go pick them up and take them to court. So it's about doing that in a place, because right now, the reality is right now in most areas of the state, there's a domestic violence court in Gulfport that we provide the advocate for. There's Harrison County Justice Court has one court day with it, and Hattiesburg has a domestic violence court. My understanding, there's no other areas of the state that have specific courts for domestic violence. So all other areas, as a domestic violence victim, you're going into court with people who have traffic violations, trespassing, shoplifting, and you're in there and being asked very intimate questions in a room full of people, because it's not realistic for the judge to tell everybody to leave out for these cases, because there's nowhere for anybody to stay. So it's a ways that we can collectively do it. And all these things come together in a way that will, again, reduce or eliminate domestic violence homicides, because we have, if we centralize things. And can I go over a little bit of the why? Because you hear the policy stuff. Before I go into the anecdotal stuff, do y'all have any other questions about the policy stuff?
I do.
Okay.
So this may be for Heather, but y'all can both answer this. So it's true, isn't it, that if not the most dangerous, one of the most dangerous calls for law enforcement are domestic violence calls. Is that correct?
Most dangerous and the most often. They're the highest.
Most dangerous and what?
And the highest number, most frequent case.
Most frequent numbers of calls are domestic violence calls.
And I can give you an example. Like, we collect statistics every year from our law enforcement partners for funding applications. And like, just the city of Biloxi, they have 2,000 calls for service a year on domestic violence. There's 365 days in the year. Look at number of domestic violence related calls that just the city of Biloxi is getting. And Biloxi is not the most populous, that's just the one that comes off the top of my head. So
and then on the thing about the murder or delineating what it is, why is that important? Or I guess, to put another way, there are signs of things that go on in domestic violence cases that, for example, and you can talk about strangulation. Like, strangulation is an indicator of domestic violence, or however y'all explain it. I didn't realize that. So the importance is to delineate that. I do think the criminal law part of that, when the way the criminal laws are, a murder's a murder. Okay. So you don't want to hamstring prosecutors on that. But it sounds like what you're talking about is to determine what type of homicide it was, or what was involved, so that you can get the data, and so then we can put things in place. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's exactly right. We don't, we're not trying to make it a preferential crime or anything of that nature. We simply want to be able to identify when homicides are related in a domestic violence situation, so that we can gather the data. Every year they do a study, and many states do this. The Uniform Crime Report lists the number of homicides by relationship. Ours are simply reported by homicide. They're not related specifically. So it's really impossible for us to actually give you a good number on how many domestic violence homicides there are in the state of Mississippi every year, because other than going through news reports, we're often not able to figure out the relationship between the offender and the victim. That's the only reason for having that delineation in there, is so that when they're entered into a crime reporting system, it establishes the relationship between the victim and the offender, so that we can, and we can it's also going to enable us to apply for more grants, to be quite honest, if we can show the extent of the problem. That's always been a consistent problem here in the state of Mississippi, is not having sufficient data to support the need for federal grant money. And if we are able to show the need for, money to help us support efforts to prevent homicides, that's gonna improve things all around. So that was a very long answer to your question, but yes, you are correct. That is the only thing we're trying to do, is gather the data.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank y'all for being here. I picked up on 3 points, and I'm not sure that's everything you asked for, but what I heard was the Fatality Review Board, training on domestic abuse for judges and courts, and then a domestic abuse court pilot program. Now, so would all those 3 things need to occur, or do you have a, if this, then this? I mean, is it all 3 things? If we were to get domestic abuse courts going across the state, would you still need the Fatality Review Board? Or would you still need training for all judges? I just need clarification.
Sure. Yeah, I think the Fatality Review Board and the DV courts are things that we need both of those. Absolutely. Now, if we were to get domestic violence courts around the state, we wouldn't need training for all courts and court clerks, but we would specifically need training for those domestic violence court personnel, if that makes sense, right? But since we're trying the pilot project, we definitely still do need the training for the other courts until we get to establish a statewide dedicated domestic violence court, and just work on training those judges, if that makes sense.
So are there, other than
Mhm,
those
yeah.
3 things that you've asked for? Did I miss anything?
Well, I mean, the delineation of homicides, but that can travel within the Fatality Review Board as part of that bill, just to amend a statute or create a different definition or something of that nature. Yes, ma'am. That's
Thank you, and
it.
thank y'all for being here.
We have a whole lot of other things, but that's it. That's all we're asking for now.
I want to ask a question as it regards to domestic violence. I recently became aware through a personal, not my own situation, but a constituent situation. I did not realize that we did not have a mandatory cooling off period for misdemeanor domestic violence charges. It was rather concerning to me that we did not have a cooling off period for that misdemeanor level of any amount of time. Is that typically the way it is in other states, that we don't have, for a misdemeanor level, that we don't have a cooling off period? Or is that something that's unique to us? Do y'all know the answer to that question?
I don't know how other states address that, and we started out years ago with a mandatory 24-hour hold once somebody was arrested for domestic violence. That kind of
Misdemeanor or felony?
felonies, I think. I don't remember if it specified for felonies, but I know the law said for a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, there was a 24-hour hold. And then somewhere along the line, it changed to the judge may impose a 24-hour hold as part of bond conditions. And so we do encourage judges to do that. So that is available regardless of whether or not the person comes, gets a bondsman, posts the bond, they're still required to stay in jail for 24 hours. But that is solely within the discretion of the judge, which becomes really important for law enforcement officers when they're talking to the judge, writing their reports, that they put in all the danger, all the significant situations, so that the judge can truly assess if making someone sit in jail is what's needed. But yeah, it is voluntary at this point, depending on what the judge puts in their bond order.
Thank you.
If I may piggyback on that, and I think this is a important issue, both on that. I mean, the reality is that in our lower courts, that victims choose not to prosecute. And so once the person's separated, then they're like, okay, that's done and all that, which But that's part of the, correct me if I'm wrong, condition of domestic violence. And I would argue is a justification for what you're asking for, because like you said, Stacy, they don't want to come to court and all that. That's their abuser slash person who traps them, who does that. And by the way, it's not just females in that condition, it's males too. So if they know that they can, but you need to be prosecuted. And what happens a lot is they drop charges because they don't want to go through it once they're out of the situation, but then they end up getting back in the situation. So I think that that's part of the issue. I don't know if I have a question there, but I think that's part of the stuff that goes on that makes these things so difficult.
Several years ago, the state put in place that law enforcement officers, if they see, you know, that they can determine the principal aggressor in there, they have the ability to press charges on behalf of the law enforcement officer. And that in its way was designed to keep it out of the responsibility of the victim in these cases. She can't come in and drop the charges, and she can't be pressured by the abuser in that case to drop the charges. But what we're running into, when you have things that are introduced as ways to make things better, then we flip that side and say, well, you know, I can't go forward without the victim. But the person, the affiant, is the one who pressed the charges, who's the law enforcement officer, who's there. And what we see a lot, and I've mentioned this to Bryce before, is we hinge a lot of cases on the victims in the cases. You know, we know that victims of domestic violence and victims of sexual assault should not be the ones who are making their own case. So if we have a law enforcement officer who press the charges, they do the legality assessment, they determine who the principal aggressor was, they do everything they have to do, they show up for court. The victim may not want to, and then she doesn't have to. And then if she doesn't, a lot of the jurisdictions we serve on the coast, and I can probably say across the state, is like, I can't do it without a victim. So with having that dedicated domestic violence court, that would reduce that and show that cases can move forward without the victim there, because as long as the person who signed the charges is there.
Well, I want to be clear on that, because this is easy, because a defendant in a court system like that has a constitutional right to confront their accuser, and that's the victim. That's why the prosecutors say we've got to have the victim. They've got to, because the officer can only testify to what they see. They can't, and that means like injuries or whatever, but they weren't there during the actual altercation, let's say.
What about homicide victims?
Well, there's a whole bunch of rules, and I mean and you have to prove that to be the case. But you're right. I think that to your point, it can be done, but a murder case, as things stand now, takes top priority because it's a murder case. And so you do all that. When you get down to, like you said, 2,000 calls in Biloxi, I mean, quite honestly, they're like, I need the victim, because they haven't spent the time, they don't have the time, effort, or whatever to make a case without the victim being on the stand to testify. Does that make sense?
It can be also something that this DV court addresses, is they will be prosecutors who can actually take the time and go back, and there will be the advocates in the courtroom to make that contact with those victims to make sure that they are there if they are needed. So it's going to,
I think
hopefully it'll solve
Right.
those problems with the victims being reluctant, because they know they'll have that safety net.
That's what you were saying. That's what you were saying, that as it stands now, they're dealing with trespass, they're dealing with, you know, assault, they're dealing with all these other cases. And so by doing what you're asking for, you're, I guess, specialized. That's why we did intervention courts with drug court, with mental health courts, with veterans courts, because they require specialized addressing. And I think that's what you're saying with domestic violence. Is that right? Okay, thank you.
Thank y'all very much. We really appreciate you coming up. I'm sure we'll be in touch with lots more questions about this. And thank you for what y'all done over the years in regards to this. So
Thank you for having us and for listening to us. It was It was a pleasure speaking with you. today.
Okay, thanks. We're going to take a 10-minute break and we're going to come back at 9:50 and we're going to be a little bit ahead of schedule. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started back. Donna, do we have Elise? Okay. We'll see if we can, we have Elise Neck that is the Policy Director for Joyful Heart Foundation. And Joyful Heart Foundation is an organization that a number of legislators have worked with in the state on looking at a number of issues. So we are so excited to have you testifying before us today. And if you will go ahead, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Boyd and members of the Senate Study
We
Group.
cannot hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now? No. Oh, shoot. 1 second.
Okay.
Oh, now can you hear me? No, I'm not muted.
IT, can you help me talk her through it? So that's on our end? Okay. What now? Okay, we're about to get assistance to try to. Hey, can you speak?
Sure. Can you hear me now? Hi. Testing, testing. Should I sing something? Let's see. It's Thursday. Is that Thursday? What day is it? Tuesday, the 19th of November. Doesn't seem to be working. Oh, maybe now.
Do y'all want me to see if Jeremy is coming, would come through? I think Jeremy's own.
Hey, Nicole,
Hey,
this is
gentlemen.
Jeremy. Can you hear me?
Gentlemen, would y'all like me to go ahead and let Molly go, and then we could come back to this and see if we could work that out? Would that be helpful? Okay. That looks beautiful. All right, we're gonna just, Molly, if you're okay to come up here, we are so glad to have Molly Montague that is here with us today from RAIN. He is the State Director of State Legislative Affairs. Elise, we're gonna keep working on this issue so we can hopefully have you in just a moment. So. Thank you, Molly, and thanks for going ahead and going. We appreciate it. Hey, Molly, and if you will remind everybody what RAIN stands for, because I can never remember. Thanks.
It's part of the spiel. I'll
Okay,
have it
great.
ready to go. All right, well, thanks. Happy to be the technical assistance here. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, for the invitation to come and speak today. I am with RAIN, which stands for the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. We are the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization, and we run the National Sexual Assault Hotline, which is what we're perhaps most known for. We also do advocacy at the state and local level and are proud to be a part of working here in Mississippi. Ooh, my presentation even made it up. Wonderful. Do I use this to, okay. Okay, I will sit tight for a second. If I click it, oh, perfect, okay. All right, we'll see if this does, okay. So I did want to just warn, I am going to be giving some examples that do discuss sexual assault. So both for those here in the room and anybody who ends up watching this at a later date. This is the National Sexual Assault Hotline. There's also a chat available if you need that as a resource. I'm here today to present on 3 separate issues and potential solutions for survivors of sexual assault here in Mississippi. And I'm going to try to do all of that in less than 10 minutes. And I appreciate your time. All right. Oh. First, I'd like to discuss an opportunity for you to help improve the reporting of sexual violence here. And this was previously in HB 1537 this year. I'd like you to imagine a 13-year-old girl. She's excited to finish middle school. She's barely a teenager. Some of you might know someone like that. At some point, her coach starts grooming her and eventually gives her alcohol to help her lower her inhibitions. When he sexually assaults her, he tells her that if she tells anyone, he'll tell them that she was drinking alcohol. She might get in trouble, might lose all her friends, maybe she'll get kicked out of school. She's scared of getting in trouble, so she doesn't tell anybody about the abuse. Rape and crimes of sexual violence are chronically underreported. with only 21.4% of victims reporting to law enforcement. And for child sexual abuse victims, only 10% report to the legal authorities. Additionally, as high as 84% of sexual assaults involve the use of alcohol. Survivors are scared of getting in trouble for alcohol and drug misdemeanors. This fear prevents survivors from reporting a serious violent crime. It also incentivizes perpetrators to harm individuals who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, since they are less likely to go to the authorities. Because they don't report, law enforcement cannot investigate these violent crimes. You can encourage survivors to come forward by offering immunity from prosecution for drug and alcohol misdemeanors for someone seeking to report sexual abuse. Mississippi allows immunity from prosecution for alcohol and drug misdemeanors for those seeking medical assistance from drug and alcohol. You can extend this protection to those seeking to report a sexual assault. Many college campuses, immunity policies extend to those reporting sexual offenses, and they have done this without seeing a rise in alcohol or drug use. Protection for these survivors should not be limited to college campuses. Providing sexual assault survivors and witnesses immunity for drug and alcohol misdemeanors encourages them to come forward, and it will help catch violent offenders and prevent serial perpetration. This legislation has the support of Ole Miss's rallying cry against sexual assault and the University of Southern Mississippi's assault prevention ambassadors. And we had students who really wanted to be here today to show their support, but unfortunately this conflicted with their exams, and so they are prioritizing that today. Other states that have similar laws include Tennessee, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Indiana. And I'd like to thank the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, who we've been able to speak with and clarify some things. And we've since added language to emphasize that this only applies when somebody is reporting a sexual offense. Extending immunity to sexual assault victims encourages survivors to report and helps hold offenders accountable. All right. So the next bill I'd like to discuss and proposal aims to prevent sexual abuse in an incredibly vulnerable and terrifying moment. And this used to be in SB 2435 and HB 1540 this year. I'm going to start with some examples. A young woman receives a day pass from jail here in Mississippi. And on the way home, the officer offers her a ride. They stop, before they get to her brother's house, they stop at a place for her to change. And while she's changing, he sneaks into the bathroom and starts groping her. He forces her to have sex. When she told her story, she said, quote, "There was nothing I could do to stop it," unquote. She felt powerless. After all, he had a badge. Another example. A woman is rushing to get to her son, who has been in an accident. Two officers pull her over for speeding. Rather than write her a ticket and send her on her way, they handcuff her and transport her to a station and imply that in order for her to go see her son, she has to have sex with them. After coercing her into sex at the station, they return her to her car and falsify a report indicating that they never left the traffic stop. When she brings a claim of sexual assault against these officers, they claim that she consented to it. These are true stories. People at their most vulnerable, sometimes still innocent before proven guilty, raped because saying no wasn't an option to someone in control of their freedom. Unfortunately, some of the officers we entrust with our protection take advantage of the power bestowed on them and sexually abuse those in their custody. Officials use providing rides home from prison, raids, and lax jail policies to sexually abuse people who feel they have no choice, are intimidated by a local powerful authority, or are violently forced into situations of abuse. The law lets these officers get away with their crimes by allowing them to claim there was consent. It is currently illegal in Mississippi for law enforcement to have sexual contact with anyone incarcerated in jail or prison. The law acknowledges that because of the power dynamic at play there, people held in such facilities cannot give consent. However, it is not currently illegal for law enforcement to have sexual contact with someone they are arresting, have in custody, or are detained. We know from the stories of survivors that the power dynamic present in incarceration exists in these situations too. Legislation is needed that would make it a crime to have engaged in a sexual act with anyone detained in custody, on probation, or on parole. Neighboring states, Louisiana and Georgia, have laws that prohibit law enforcement from engaging in sexual conduct with anyone under their authority. And most law enforcement will tell you that such engagement is abhorrent. The International Association of Police Chiefs agrees that this is an issue that necessitates leadership at the local level. Yet Mississippi statute does not have a clear rule against sexual acts with those detained. The legislation and proposal would put into a clear boundary for law enforcement to lean on against sexual acts with those under their authority. Okay, lastly, I'd like to touch on a hidden problem that's being addressed nationwide with a very simple solution. Let's say you go into the hospital for a shoulder surgery, and while you're under anesthesia, students are brought in to practice a separate rectal, prostate, or gynecological exam on you. You'd probably like to know that that was going to happen ahead of time. However, someone could conduct a practice, non-medically necessary pelvic exam while you are under for your shoulder surgery, and you wouldn't necessarily know it. While these are likely uncommon, these practice exams, unrelated to the procedure the patient went in for, do happen without the explicit permission of the patient. Most physicians and students want to build a relationship of communication, trust, and consent with their patients. Requiring patients to give explicit, informed consent prior to these educational exams protects future medical professionals and patients, especially for survivors of sexual assault. Waking up from a procedure to find you were violated elsewhere in your body is extremely re-traumatizing and causes some survivors to avoid needed medical care. 25 states already have laws on the books requiring explicit informed consent, and that includes Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the American Association of Medical Ethics, the American Medical Association's Code of Medical Ethics support informed consent practices. Legislation requiring informed consent can and should have exceptions for medically needed procedures and emergencies. And this simple policy can give medical students and those who train them the support of the law when seeking consent before educational pelvic exams and ensure that medical interactions are transparent and safe for patients. Thank you for listening today, and I'm happy to expand on any of this.
Molly, and the last thing that you just mentioned, I thought we had legislation in this last year. Did we? Okay. It came up in discussion somewhere or something. I know.
It is an issue we've worked on nationwide, and we're seeing it come up, and we're certainly happy to hear it was here and would love to see it pass.
Came up in some discussion, I know, at some point in time. Maybe it was tried to be added or something like that. I'm not sure. Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay. The situation that you mentioned earlier about the mother being arrested, that was in Mississippi?
That example is actually an FBI investigation elsewhere. The first example was in Mississippi, of the young woman being pulled, being taken home and raped.
Okay. And okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Your question. All right, thank you so much. This is, we will look for this legislation again, and we will try to see where this is in the process. So thank you so
Absolutely,
much.
thank you.
Really appreciate you coming in, and we appreciate the help that you've given us before on providing information statewide and looking at a lot of different issues in regards to rape testing and all of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you all for the time.
Gentlemen, how are we in our technical difficulties right now? Okay. Okay, all right. Commissioner, you are here. Would you mind going ahead and presenting? Thank you. We're going to keep going. I think we do. Yeah, we can go with them by paper. I think that'll be fine.
Not my favorite way to do a PowerPoint, but, oh no, he's got it up. Madam Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I have also with me this morning, to my right is Denise Wesley. She's the Director of our Division of Child Support Enforcement. And then out here is Alex Buckley, I'll get it out in a minute. He's our Legislative Liaison. And then Mark Jones, who is our Chief Communications Officer. So child support at the Department of Human Services is really one of our largest programs. We serve about 257,000 children through that program. And I think it's one of our most effective programs. As you'll see as we walk through this, it's very successful. So just to begin to give you a few of the numbers, these are the various services that are included within our child support enforcement division. We are in the business of finding parents. If we're going to get support orders in place, we have to find those parents, the non-custodial parents. And so our parent location program located over 46,000 children in the last fiscal year. Then the next step in that is establishing paternity. And we do that through DNA testing. We have a vendor who does all of the DNA testing. We established over 9,300 paternities via those DNA tests last year, and we have a almost 95% paternity establishment rate through that program. Once we establish paternity, obviously you want to have a support order in place. And so we put 13,000 these are new support orders. Am I right, Denise? For last year, we put 13,000 new support orders in place. About 87% of the cases we looked at, we got a support order entered in those. And then where the rubber hits the road, the collection piece of this. And on behalf of custodial parents across the state of Mississippi, we collected 357 million plus in child support last year. One of our enforcement tools is to suspend people's driver's licenses. You know, there's not a quicker way to get somebody's attention than to suspend their driver's license. And that is a tool that we use in order to get non-custodial parents back into compliance and to begin paying, if they have an arrearage, to begin paying that arrearage. We also have another tool, obviously filing a contempt proceeding. We increased those last year from an average of about 238 a month to almost 500 per month last year. And I don't think it's mentioned here. I'm not sure it's mentioned in the slide.